Hello to everyone. Thank you to be with us for this first parallel session about mining and the energy transition. A paper presented in this session will question the social, economic, and environmental impacts of mining extraction linked to the energy transition. We must keep in mind that transition implies the development of new technologies which require the extraction of new minerals and thus lead to more pollution and more environmental impact. We begin this session with Mrs. Akuba Bezeba Yalley, a PhD student at the Ghanaian University of Mine and Technology. Mrs. Bezeba will present a paper questioning the sustainable mitigation measure of illegal miners and large-scale mining companies in the Ghanaian mining industry. Mrs. Yalley, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. I'll just share my screen now, if I may. Okay, thank you. Mr. Moderator, all protocols duly observed. My name, as already mentioned, is Akuba Bezeba Yalley, and I'm here to present on the sustainable mitigation measures to the negative environmental, safety, security, social, and economic impacts of illegal miners' encroachments and operations on registered large-scale mining companies' concession. So this is a case study of a Ghanaian mining company. This will be the outline of the presentation. I'll begin by introducing the problem and then explain the methods that I'll be using. Also look at the results and discussions, and finally conclude and give recommendations. For the introduction, we know that mining is an industry that contributes largely to the economic growth of many nations. And apart from its contributing to the GDP growth of the economies of these nations, we also look at other benefits as income generation, employment, and in other parts of the world, especially in developing countries like mine, we look at reduction in the rural-urban migration. Mostly people like to move to the urban centers because those are the areas where they have more jobs and facilities. But mining has helped to reduce this. Now, mining as a business comes in various skills, and these skills are based on the classification of the skills are usually based on the input, okay, in terms of the capital inputs, operational costs. Also look at the output that is measured at the entrance of the mine. We also look at the labor and then the mechanization. So with regards to that, we have three major skills. We have the large scale, we have the medium scale, and then we have the small scale. In countries where mining is ongoing or goes on, they have the mining laws and regulations which streamline the operations. As such, if we have any mining operation that does not comply to these laid down rules and regulations, we say that particular mining operation is an illegal one. And quite coincidentally, most of the illegal mining operations happen on a smaller scale. So these illegal mining operations do not adhere to the laid down environmental mining rules, may have water usage rules, and of course, they do not contribute in any way to the growth of the economy. And it's been seen that rather these operations are a threat to the environment, the safety, security, social and economic sustainability of those countries in which they are practiced. Commonly practiced illegal mining countries, we have here Bolivia, China, Brazil, Burkina Faso, Indonesia, Ghana, Ecuador, India, Malawi, Mali, Mozambique, Peru, Philippines, South Africa, Tanzania, Zambia, Zimbabwe, to mention the list, according to Hensel et al. 2003. Usually, the minerals of interest are mostly precious minerals, but for Ghana, mostly is gold. Their major interests are gold. And literature has it that these practices are actually a threat to climate smart agriculture. And also they lead to land degradation, loss of biodiversity, deforestation, destruction of water bodies, a major challenge being faced by my country at the moment, increased level of siltation, turbidity, and etc. Now, apart from these illegal mining operations ongoing at different locations without even legal title to the concessions being worked on, they are also taking a new dimension, that is encroaching on registered large-scale mining companies' concession. And usually when they do that, they produce, of course, these negative impacts. And also there's a lot of conflicts which actually results out of that. The conflicts which of course affects the companies and also affects the communities as well as the nation as a whole. So this research focused on the illegal mining operations on Anglo-Gold Ashanti, AGA Obuasi mine. Now, if you come to Ghana, the Obuasi mine happens to be the largest mine and the richest mine in the country. Gold mine. And this mine had been in existence for over 100 years. Unfortunately, this mine has also been facing this challenge for a long time. And it's got to a stage, a point somewhere in 2014, where it became even difficult for the mine to deal with the issue of illegal mining operations on its concession. Other mining companies, of course, like Goldfields, Takwa Mine, Down Mine, we have the Bibiani Mine, had also been experiencing this, but fortunately for them, the intensity was lower and it could be managed in the earlier stages. But that was not so with the Obuasi Mine. So basically, this research is going to ascertain the environmental impacts, the safety, security, social, and economic impacts from the operations, and also look at measures that the company put in place to address the situation, how successful the measures were, and also look at sustainable ways of mitigating the impacts. For this study, 4 main data sets were collected. The first one was the questionnaire administration to the company workers. The questionnaire should have been extended to the illegal miners because, of course, they were the root cause of the problem, and their opinion should have been sought. But unfortunately for the research team, At the time when this research was being conducted, that was somewhere between October 2016 and February 2017, there had been some conflict issues and they had grown wild. In order to defend themselves, they were very violent, and it wasn't safe to actually approach them at that time. Then interviews were also conducted for stakeholders of the company. The company had actually delegated some workers, senior officials, to actually look into the problem and look at ways of mitigating this. Then field data on illegal mining operations. So field data obtained from visits to the mine to observe, and also information given from the mine, and then general literature on illegal mining operations. For the questionnaire administration, the stratified random sampling method was used. So basically, the workers actually in their various departments formed the first groupings, and then within each grouping, the questionnaires were randomly administered. In total, 200 questionnaires were administered, out of which 164 individuals actually responded. So this gave a response rate of about 82%. And then in analyzing the questionnaire data, SPSS, that is the Statistical Package for Social Sciences software, was used to analyze the questionnaire data. So, for the 164 individuals, we look at the social demographic representation. So, we had about 131 individuals being males, which just suggested that, of course, the mining industry in Ghana is a male-dominated area, and only 33 were females, which was just around 20%. And then the age range, we looked at 18 to 30% being, 18 to 30, that is the age range, that is 18 years to 30 years, being 78 individuals, and then 51 and above age range, that is 18 years to 30 years, 31 years to 40 years, 41 to 50, and then 51. So the majority were within the 18 to 30 years, which showed that it was a youthful composition. So 51 and above was just about 11. Actually, this can be well explained in the sense that for the underground operations in Ghana, the retirement age is 55. So around that time, most of people might be going on retirement, or around that age, sorry. So the educational level, we had majority being undergrads. So those who had no formal education, on the mine, each person had some form of formal education. So there was no one who said they didn't have any formal education. For basic education, that is to the junior secondary level, we had about 30 people, and representing 18.3%. Then for the senior secondary school, we had about 12 individuals, and the undergrads, which had majority of the figures, we had 111, which represented about 68%. Then the working experience from 0 to 36 years, the majority were individuals, that is, who had worked between 6 to 12 years in the company. That was, and then for, apart from the mining company, there were other contractors who were also working for them. So majority of them were actually company workers, about 84, and then other contract companies also about 80. Now for The departments, we had mining operations carrying majority, that is about 12. We had mine planning 10, individual survey 8, geology 9, fire and rescue team 4, then sustainability and community development 8, human resources 7, geotech 6, health and safety 8, finance 3, engineering 4. So for the results and discussions, the first results that was obtained, that is in terms of land degradation, that was the environmental degradation. It could easily be seen, I mean, just visual inspection, that these miners were speedily degrading the land. This figure here, for instance, shows these people were operating on a surface level, that is surface mining, but you could see that there was no form, and as they were operating here, they had accumulation of water, which they did nothing about, nothing to reclaim the land. And obviously, this water will serve as breeding sites for mosquitoes. We also have this surface operation here. You could see, though it's a surface operation, but there was no form of benching done here, as it's supposed to do for surface mining. And of course, they left this water here. So these are also common sites on the mine. This is an underground shaft developed by the small-scale miners. So, sorry, by the illegal miners. So they use this shaft to intercept the underground workings and then move to the various mining phases to work. Now for the water pollution also, fortunately for the company, they were not processing their ore on the company's concession. Actually, they were doing it within the communities. So they were actually moving to where, carrying their load to where they could get water, that is the stream. And then after, in the process, they would use some of the water, okay, the water body to dilute their material. And then in using the mercury amalgamation technique in processing their ore, they tend to release mercury into the water body and also increase the turbidity of the water bodies. So members of the community were more likely to face issues, especially those who depended largely on the natural water over there. Then the air pollution, that is in the smelting of the gold, mercury vapor is released into the atmosphere, and we all know the dangers of mercury to us. Then in terms of safety, with this, the workers were asked whether they had issues about the illegal miners encroaching their concession. And out of that, out of the 164, we had about 126 who felt threatened at some point and were even afraid to go to work because of the operations of the illegal miners. One, they felt that the illegal miners could attack them, and that was a situation that was ongoing. Workers who go to work, working underground, and the illegal miners who were mostly armed will move there and threaten the workers, sack the workers from the face, and any attempt to resist them, that individual had to deal with being attacked. So they already felt they were afraid. And at some point, they were actually physically moving to the mine site to face the workers. And in such one of such situations, a senior official lost his life out of that. So the workers generally...
Mrs. Yalley, you have 2 minutes left, please.
Oh, okay, all right, thank you. So there are also conflicts within the communities, destruction of company properties and state properties. Then the social impacts also the mine at some point had to go into care and maintenance, and the mine was known to have a stale relationship at that time. So at the point when they needed money for partnership, no company was ready to partner with them because it was known that they didn't have good social relation with their community. At the end of the day, the economic impacts were ascertained. So these costs were gathered from the mine. That is the cost of damages and the repair of the various damages. Look at the ventilation walls, mine drainage, blocking of their accesses, and reclamation. So overall costs summing up to about $3 million plus dollars. In conclusion, we say that the illegal miners' encroachments and operations is damaging to the mine and the community. The mine put out various measures such as shedding about 60% of its concession to the Minerals Commission to be given to them, but that does not even satisfy them. Engaging security, that is the military men, was also not economical because the mine was spending more in maintaining them. And engaging the chiefs and traditional rulers also to combat it also did not really solve this problem. With the recommendations, looking at the fact that the measures put in place did not actually solve the problem, the recommendations given here should be from the policy reforms. Policies regarding small-scale mining registration and all that actually is impeding people from registering their mines, their operations. And as such, people are rather more or less being encouraged indirectly from the policies to actually engage in illegal mining. So it should be policy reforms and implementation, and then formalization of the artisanal and small-scale mining operations in Ghana. And the policy should be inclusive. That is.
Excuse me, Mrs. Yalley, I'm really sorry, but you should conclude now. Okay,
all right. So they should look at inclusive policy formulation and implementation. Thank you. Thank you. Please, I'm done.
Thank you. We continue now with Hugo Lapeyronie, PhD student at the Paris Panthéon-Sorbonne University and also at the French Agency of Development. Hugo's presentation is entitled Energy Transition, Minerals and Sustainable Development Goals, a Complex Relationship. Hugo analyzes satellite data to question the socio-economic impacts of mining industry in the global south. Hugo, it's your turn to speak. I have also to share your presentation, excuse me. Are you ready? Yeah, okay, so.
Well, thank you, Nicolas. In fact, on slide 2, you will see the new title of our working paper. sorry for that. That we wrote with my co-author Esther Selchak. She's also a PhD student at the University Paris Panthéon-Sorbonne. So the new title is Who Pays the Price of Decarbonization, the Impact of Mining for Energy Transition Minerals. Slide, please. So, in introduction, I wanted to go back on the mineral intensity of the energy transition. I think now that we basically all know that the green technology, so the wind turbines, solar panels, electric vehicles, are more mineral intensive than the fossil fuel counterparts. For example, for an electric vehicle, we need about 5 to 6 times the same amount of minerals than a fossil fuel car. So, as a direct consequence, we will need to have a lot of this mineral for the energy transition, and this is what is displayed on the graph on your left. It's a graph from the International Energy Agency, published in 2021, where they show that if we want to reach a net zero target by 2050, we will have in 2040 a net demand of mineral multiplied by 6, and not for mineral. It's not for all the mineral. It's for a very specific kind of mineral that are sometimes called the energy transition minerals or the critical minerals. It depends which author, which institution are talking about them. So the direct consequence of that is that we will have no choice but to mine more, to have more mines to open more mines. And due to the unequal distribution of geological resources on the surface of the Earth, on the relative depletion of existing deposits in the north, and kind of reluctance of global north countries such as France to open mine on its own territories, we will mine more in the global south, and it's pretty obvious now, especially for RDC, where we will it is where we will produce most of the cobalt for the energy transition. So in other words, we will mine more in the countries that need that are the most in need of development, and these countries are going to be central for the energy transition. Slide, please. So the relationship between mining and sustainable development is quite complex. In fact, it's not a new literature. At the macro level, you probably all know the resource curse debate, which has a sizable literature. At the mine level, it's a more emerging kind of literature. We have some emblematic papers that are interesting at the economic impact of like the local economic impact of mining. We have a famous paper by Aragon and Rudd published in 2011 that look at one gold mine in Peru, and another important paper published recently by Basile Gérard that look at artisanal mining. But this literature globally largely overlook the case of these specific minerals that are going to be used by the energy transition. And it's not very surprising, because basically we have some kind of this literature has always been plagued by an issue of data availability. It's pretty hard to find data on large scale, find relevant data in the proximity of industrial mines. We have plenty of good reason for this, but sometimes it's just the mining companies that want researchers to go at the proximity of industrial mines, and in fact, as there is much more gold in coal mines than every other minerals produced in the world, it's logic that researchers go first to this mine to conduct some research. But this literature had some kind of revolution recently with the increasing use of remote sensing data, so satellite data, to look at various outcomes of sustainable development. And in our case, we were interested to the paper that looked at the economic impact of mining and the impact of the local economy. And we were only able to find 3 papers that have used remote sensing data for assessing the local economic impact of industrial mining on a large scale. When I say large scale, it's a multi-country context or even a continent level. So the first one in this literature was published in 2017 by Shannon Paul and co-author, and it is the first to assess the local economic development of industrial mining. They study West Africa mostly, gold mining in West Africa, and they use nightlight data, which is quite famous among the economists to be a good proxy of economic activity, and they find a positive impact of the opening of a new mine. More recently, we have a quite emblematic paper published by Mamo and co-author. They assess a local economic impact of extensive and intensive industrial mining, extensive being the opening of a new mine, and intensive being the increasing production of an existing mine for the whole African continent, also using night lights. And they find a positive impact of the opening of a new mine, but not for their result for an increasing production is not very robust. And very recently, we have a very nice paper by Provenzano and Burl, which is still in working paper stage, where they assess, similarly to Mamo, the local economic impact of industrial mining in Africa with another kind of remote sensing data, which is Landsat imagery with combined with some machine learning, and they also find a positive impact, but they look for some heterogeneities between countries, and they find that political resource curves in the way that democratic countries are more likely to have a positive impact of industrial mining than autocratic countries. Slide, please. So why it is so important to look at the local impact of mining in the context of the energy transition? First, we often hear that the energy transition is an opportunity for developing countries for their economic development. But this is not so sure, because you have some contradiction between the literature that look at some very specific mine and that can find several negative outcomes, such as child labor, increasing poverty, or many negative outcomes, and another literature that look, as I've shown, at more larger scale, that tend to find positive impact of industrial mining. So it's kind of a matter of justice and equity for this country, because they are not using this mineral for themselves. They are extracting this mineral for the global north, basically. So we can decarbonize our economy. And it is also important to understand the local economic impact of mining, because it can reduce the sustainable supply of this mineral for the energy transition, because due to poverty or if the poverty increases, people are more likely to block a mine or do strikes at the proximity of a mine and impede the production of a mine, which can be sometimes really crucial. One mine, for example, for copper, the big mines in Latin America can put in danger the whole energy transition. So in this paper, we try to answer the following research question: what is the socioeconomic impact of increased green mineral mining in the global south countries? So in this paper, we propose first to reassess the potential of nightlights to investigate the local economic impact of industrial mining, but systematically excluding a central radius of at least 5 kilometers. Why this systematic exclusion? This is because when Shunanpol headquarter and Mamo headquarter did their analysis in their paper, they didn't exclude the mine area from their analysis. And as industrial mine tends to be illuminated at night, they measure at the same time the light from the mine and from the perimeter of the mine, which lead to kind of endogenous regression because they are not measuring what they think they were measuring. In this paper, we also investigate for heterogeneities among industrial mines. This is also a limit of the previous literature, as they look at mining as a whole. They don't disaggregate mines between the minerals, and this is why we can't use these previous studies to have some information of the local economic impact of the energy transition minerals. And finally, another methodological point, we consider some recent econometric advances regarding staggered difference in different strategies by using an alternative estimator to the classical 2y effect, but I will come more to that more in detail after. Slide, please. So in terms of data, we use like Mamo and Shunanpol nightlight data, but we use VIR data because they are in Mamo headquarter in Shunanpol, they use DMSP OLS data. So just to explain in a few words what is the difference. DMSP OLS data, it's an older satellite that capture nightlights, and it's kind of affected by something we call a glowing effect. It means that light emanating from one pixel can glow over non-pixels, and so it basically leads to spurious regression because it says that there is economic activity in a pixel which should be black. And so we use VIR data. In fact, we use an extended VIR data dataset, which is based on DMSP OLS, because VIR data, the issue with VIR data also, it's a more recent dataset. It's only from 2013 to today. And DMSP OLS data, they end in 2012. So we use dataset provided by Shen and co-author that allow us to have a dataset from 2000 to 2020. And we collect this data from 5 km to 100 km around each mine. In terms of mining data, I will be quick. We collect more than 1,000 industrial mines opening for the whole global south countries, and over 4,000 not yet mined areas for the entire global south. I will comment just after that in the next slide why we collect not yet mined areas. Next slide, please. So in terms of the empirical strategy, we use, as the previous literature, different strategies. As a treatment, we use the mine opening, and as control group, we use what I call the not yet mined areas, which are areas that share similar that are supposed to share similar socio-economic and environmental characteristics that led industrial mining companies to want to invest in this area. So they can be used as a good control group to study the opening of an industrial mine. In terms of, I want to talk about the model. I think we don't have any time, too much time. But in terms of, just to say, in terms of estimation, we take care of the recent decision regarding the classical difference and difference estimator, and we also test for the Sun and Abraham estimator. Next slide, please. So rapidly, quickly for the finding, we confirm first the previous finding. We find indeed that the opening of a new industrial mine increase the local economic impact. So this is the important variable are the treatment debit. But when we exclude gold and coal mine, we see that the coefficients are greatly reduced. In fact, what it means that the finding of Mamo and Sean and Paul, and even from Coronado, were in great part influenced by coal and gold mines. Next slide, please. So this is our main result. We run a separate difference estimation for every mineral in our dataset. In fact, we have a bit more mineral, but that's the main ones. And we see that the only positive coefficients, significant coefficients, are for gold mining and coal mining, and I think also iron mining. But for the energy transition minerals, such as copper mines, nickel mines, cobalt mines, we don't see any significant result. Next slide, please. And in fact, for lithium, we see a negative coefficient. So a first explanation could be that it depends on the country where the minerals are extracted. So we ran some regression for each continent. So we don't see much difference for Africa, Latin America, and Asia Pacific, but we see a negative impact for Middle East. We did also some regression for specific countries that are key for the energy transition. They all experience positive impact, with the exception of DRC. And finally, we investigate the type of mine, and we find that open pit mine led to more negative results, more negative economic impact than underground mine. We can two slides. Yeah, I will skip. No, just the one before. So to give some comments with this result, consistently with the previous literature, we find that the opening of an industrial mine has, on average, a positive impact of local economic activity. However, when we run regression for each mineral, we found significant heterogeneities among minerals, and most notably, there is a lack of evidence supporting the fact that mining critical minerals for the industrialization foster local economic development. We have some concern about it's normal to have some concern regarding night life, but we can say that when we find, this is our interpretation, but we are not confident to interpret an increase in night life, because there is plenty of bad reasons why night life can increase due to mining, due to other factors than simple mining. But there are much less reason explaining why night life does not increase or decrease in the case of the opening of a new mine. And that is it.
Thank you, Mr. Lapeyronie. Now we will do the third and final paper presented by Marie Forget and Magali Grossi, both professor at the Savoie Mont Blanc University. Marie Forget is professor of geography, and Magali Grossi is a professor of geology. This presentation is entitled Beyond Technology and Towards Sustainable Trajectories for Mining Territories, a Challenge for the Present. So, Marie, Magali, we are listening to you, and I just watch your presentation.
So, thank you. It will be a bit special with it because we will be two speaking on the same presentation. And as it was said, I am a geologist and Marie is a geographer. And we think that it's really interesting to cross our views on mining territories. And that's what we will try to do on this presentation. Next one, please. Yeah. So as you know, and as it has been said already this afternoon, we need more metals because of the energy transition, but also because of the population development, the urbanization, the development of developing countries, the economic development of developing countries, and also because of this energy transition, as it has been said before, there is this nexus between energy and raw materials. That means that we need more metals, especially to produce the so-called green energy. Knowing that, how to have a sustainable mining? The fact is that mining is not sustainable activity. It is not, because minerals are not renewable at the human scale, because mining has really important social and environmental impacts, sometimes positive social impacts, but sometimes negative. And most of the time, the environmental impacts are really negative, as it has been said on the first presentation this afternoon. That mining is driven by the global market, and so it's only the economic issues that drive mining activity. And as it has been said on the previous presentation, there is this division between global north that use minerals and global south where we go and extract the minerals. So the question is how to develop a more sustainable mining, because sustainable mining is not possible. So how can we have a more sustainable activity?
So first, we'd like to address a bit of context for sustainable mining. We choose to name it from speeches to practice, that is to discuss, because it's mainly known that many criticisms have been leveled to mining industry, often justified by mining impacts, mainly damage to the health of worker and or local population, significant environmental damages that can lead also to social conflicts. So the mining industry have welcomed the concept of sustainable development. It has found a very great echo in the mining world. So in the 90s, we have two notions that emerged: the responsible and sustainable mining concept. So what it has to be said is that it is an international approach and a voluntary approach, that the mining company voluntarily promotes some indicators that can conclude to the sustainability of the mining activity, mainly to reach a social license to operate. That's the main goal. And what's very interesting is that this international approach isn't a legal approach, is more that a normative approach, but that can be as strong as a legal approach. So this is a non-binding normative world, which is based on good practices in between the mining companies. So when we talk about sustainability, we have to see two big branches of sustainability: weak sustainability and strong sustainability. Mainly, mining is focused on weak sustainability, meaning that the economic growth is more important than other dimensions. So what the difference is mainly between these two approaches is how we address the five capital's dimensions, namely natural, manufacture, financial, human, and social, and how they can replace one another. So the solution proposed to address social environmental issues in mining activities mainly are based on technical and technological innovation. So therefore, a key tension for resource use and management is whether metals are viewed as fixed stocks versus opportunity cost. Mainly two big ways of understanding what the resource are. Scientific and ecologists mainly see the resources, mineral resource, as non-substitutable resources, and with a determined stock. So they aim at looking more on industrial ecology principle, and the objective is closing the loop, focusing on recycling. Meanwhile, mineral economists see more the resource as opportunity cost. So resource depletion leads to scarcity, which leads to higher prices, which leads to new technology to extract lower-grade ores, which leads to environmental impacts. Also, when we're talking about mining, we generally talking about territories which is impacted by this activity. And on territories, that's the graphic you have on the right-hand side. Mainly, we're looking on one and only one type of value, which is the monetary economic value. Meanwhile, on a territory, there is more than one value, and we've tried to across to represent, and surely we missed some. Legacy values, that's non-use value of the resource, and commons value, patrimonial value, ecosystemic value. So all these values are overlapping, and they all are social-cultural construction. So you can't address a mining site in South Africa as you can access in Latin America, because all the cultural context and social context is different. Also, for each value, you have a competition around the use of the territory, mainly on transversal resources, which are the land, energy, and water. That's the three main competition mining activities encounter with the society. So if we are thinking about sustainable mining, it has to be arbitrated. Mining activities are not on top of the sustainable development activities. That's for sure, and mainly when mining activity plans to be installed in a territory, we should first ask what could or is developed on that site that can contribute to the development of the society, sustainable development of the society. Next. So these values, we've used these values to decompose them and to find some indicators that we could use to describe the integrated territorial value. So we've decomposed them in geology, economy, environment, society, culture, and heritage. And each dot represents one indicator that we thought of. The main problem is that when we speak in indicators, we mainly have quantitative indicators, and it's quite difficult to make a model with qualitative indicators. So these territories have several components, and they all are linked to several values. So we also we revisited the famous mining cycle, which is not more a cycle, to represent what could be a territorial trajectory of a mining territory. So we've got different paths that a territory can follow at each level of the cycle. So it's necessary to integrate mining activities in this territorial trajectory to see where it stands and how it can bifurcate. And it's also necessary to integrate post-mining development very early in the project to see the path that the territory would follow.
So on these trajectories, if we have this scheme in mind, then we can think about how to make more sustainable mining, having these whole pictures, and not only the time of the mining activity in time, but also the post-mining development. Next slide, please. So in order to do that, we think that one way to reach more sustainable mining is to follow the mitigation hierarchy, avoid, reduce, restore, and offset, which has been introduced for assessing the environmental impact of any activity. So this scheme is based on a hierarchy, with first thing is trying to avoid the environmental impacts, or also now we can include the social impacts. For the mine, avoiding would be just avoiding opening mines, or thinking about how many mines we want, what is the size we want, limiting the time and duration of the mine. The second stage is to minimize the impacts. Minimizing by thinking about the duration of the mining activity, its intensity, its spatial extent, for example. Then the third step would be to restore the environment or the social environment. And actually, this restoration happens only in the post-mining phases. After the mine has closed, then we have environmental restoration, but not before. And the last step is to offset, which is to compensate for the residual impacts to achieve at least a no net loss or even a net gain, so having positive effects. So this scheme has been developed, as I said, first for environmental impacts, and it has been now introduced to assess the social impacts. As we said before, as mining territories are a geo-socio ecosystem, we need to have a global overview of all these components and to include them in this scheme. As indicated on the right, most efficient to mitigate the impacts is to avoid and then minimize, and offsetting and restoration are the last efficient ones. But nowadays, what is mostly done is just offsetting and restoration at post-mining stages. So next slide, please. So what can be done for mining, first at a global scale and then at the local scale? So as we said before, first thing to avoid and limit the impacts is just to avoid opening new mines. And to do that means deep societal changes, like going to more sobriety and low-tech, less consumption and more repairing of all the electronic goods we have here, for instance, and also increasing recycling. But despite this, we know that nowadays recycling is not sufficient to face the needs, and that sobriety and low tech is not really in the mood. So anyhow, we need more mining. So maybe avoiding opening mines is definitely not easy to do. One way also to avoid mine opening is to reprocess some mine waste. This starts to be done in some places. There are some examples in Morocco, for instance, where people are reprocessing the mine waste. So the issue at the global scale are what materials to mine, for what use and where. What size of mine? Do we need to open a lot of small mines? Should we open just fewer mines but larger mines? And this should be discussed at an international level. And so we can wonder if there is no need of an international governance. Knowing that's not easy to put on, and knowing also that, as we could see with the last COP, for instance, usually the big events doesn't end up in much things. It's really slow motion. So most efficient is also obviously to work at the mining scale, at the local scale or regional scale. Can you go to the next slide? Thanks. So at the territorial scale, what can be done if we say that we know that there's a mine that could be opened? To avoid and minimize the social and environmental negative impacts, we have to work at each stage of the mining cycle. During the exploration phase, during the construction phase, during operation, and during mine closure and post-mining management. For that, we need to really work and work in advance on what could be the impacts and how to mitigate them, minimize them. And the policies and the governance, they have a key role in that, especially restrictive policies. As Hugo said before, the positive economic impacts were higher in countries with more democracy than in others. So governance has a key role to that. We also need to balance the territorial values to be promoted. As we said before, we think that on a mining territory, there are 5 main values: the geological value, the economical value, which are really linked, and then the environmental, societal, and cultural values. What we can see now is that usually the economy value is more important than all the other ones. So we should have a balance between all these values to prioritize what should be done at the local scale. So for that, we need to prioritize, as we said before, avoidance and minimization rather than restoration and offset at each stage of the mining cycle. So that means that each project should be adapted, having this mitigation hierarchy in mind for each stage of the mining cycle. And this can only be achieved if there's a strong national and local governance with restrictive policies. It can work in Canada, it can work in Ireland, it should work in other places as well.
To conclude, we could the main message we'd like to say is that sustainable mining, the first step is a strong multi-level governance, and that's going back to the territory. For instance, we could think of having a little bit more constraints on the development of mining projects in their location, and also in some ways that they are developed. For instance, thinking more of short circuit sectors in developing country when you want to open a mining site, thinking of developing also a part of the value chain, like an option for the mining activity. Also, it would mean rethinking global economic models, to review real needs. Magali have said it, also reinvest in low tech that is more easy to recycle or repair. And the main point is that for us, the concept of territorial trajectory is central because these mean all the values of and vulnerability of the territories should be taken into account when we speak of sustainable mining. And that's the title of our presentation, beyond technology, because the technological response that is given nowadays isn't enough. So we've developed this framework, which certainly needs to be concreted, to develop a more applied methodology and develop more direct indicators that could be used for decision making. And we are now looking for funding for a PhD student to do that for us. Thanks.
Thank you, Marie and Magali. I'm pretty sure we have several questions from the online chat, but before maybe we have a question from the room. Someone wants to ask a question? You, but maybe but other people, no?
I do have a question for Hugo.
Okay.
From the room?
Yeah, please.
I had maybe a question for you. You mentioned, I think it was in slide 10, that there were, depending on the region, there were different effects, and even sometimes negative or positive. There was negative for this year, I think.
Yeah.
Was it due to the differences of minerals, basically, and related to what you showed in the previous slide, or there were some other reasons?
Our guess, because we did not do the regulation yet, it is related to the relatively poor governance of the mining sector in DRC.
Okay.
It's more related to this. At the bigger scale, I also showed a table where all the continents were displayed, and we had a negative impact for Middle East. And I think it is more related to the kind of mines that are exploiting in the Middle East, which are more remote than less integrated in the rest of the economy than in other parts of the world. That's my explanation. But we still need to further explore the kind of points. It is in the conclusion I was talking about extension of the paper, and that's one of them.
Before taking other question, I just want to do a call for online people. Please feel free to ask your question. Don't be shy, and we are waiting for your question. So please.
Yes, I have a question for whoever we want to reply. I'm curious to know more about the worldwide mine management now, if there is any, if there are common rules. I just heard about the Kimberley process, but I'm wondering if there is more. And also, do we have an idea of how much resources for the economic transition we have? And if we make ourselves more dependent from these resources because we want to make solar panels and whatever, how do we know how much there is? Because as you said, it's not renewable. So does it make sense to be extremely dependent on something we don't know for how long time we have something?
I start with the worldwide governance where the simple reason that the resource and reserve are often presented by country, but rarely the country is operating it. And the knowledge and the governance is done in between transnational enterprises. That's usually the transnational companies. They do have mines all over the world, and they do that in Australia and Latin America. So it's quite difficult to have a governance with economic entities. And the question on durability of minerals, it's a very good question. I actually work on lithium, And that's the main question is why do we project all the future developments, for example, for EV on lithium, knowing that the exponential demand for lithium won't reach the demand, and knowing that meanwhile other technologies may take the place of lithium. It's always we do events with mining of one type of minerals, but also research, technological innovation, multiply the needs and the technical solution. So you might.
Please, when you are asking a question, don't forget to present yourself. Please.
Yes, my name is Hans-Erik Lundgren, and I'm currently an independent advisor, but I spend a lot of time with the OECD, and I just want to draw your attention to the due diligence guidance for responsible supply chains on minerals from conflict-affected and high-risk areas that apply to all multinationals working in those countries. And there's also an even stronger international agreement with legal binding in terms of corruption of foreign officials, which have been applied in a number of OECD legislations, have persecutions in France, in Germany, and other cases. So there are some legal instruments, as well as there are guidelines that actually have been developed on this front. I just wanted to say that, coming from a mining nation, which is Sweden, where they moved the whole city of 20,000 people to be able to continue with unsustainable mining, but the people in the city voted in favor of it because it was their livelihood.
And your reaction?
I want just a reaction about Sweden and Kiruna, for instance. Mani, you can develop on that, you know better than I do. But that's the main difference among mining territories. There are mining territories which have a long mining history, such as Sweden. And I know that in Kiruna, many people work in the mine, and that's probably a reason why the people accepted to move the city to dig more in the mine. But there are also other territories where mining is really new or ingoing. And so that's what we say about the cultural value too. The cultural value is very different on the territory in Kiruna or in Sweden, and as it is, for instance, in the Atacama Desert. So this should be taken into account too. When we want to develop a mining project, it's not only the economic interest, it's also, okay, the mine will go there for maybe a few decades, maybe 50 years, but then the people living there, how can they work and how can they live? What is the next development to be done there? And this should be taken into account. That's what we think.
Can add one thing,
Sure.
is that in Kiruna, all the territorial tissue is around mining. When a mine arrives in a new territory, it destabilizes all the traditional activities. So that's the main difference.
Well, I worked in developing countries. I just learned this morning there are 400 illegal mines just in Côte d'Ivoire. So if you take the first presentation there, hundreds of thousands of illegal mines.
Yeah.
So practice does not correspond necessarily the real world situation to that there should be local governance that is very transparent in favor. And I think we have to start from reality.
Yeah.
And then try to build up something.
Thank you. Another question?
Yes,
Yeah,
to the
please.
three speakers in different levels of distinction. So since you are I'm Pierre Jacques, and from the UC Louvain in Belgium, in Louvain, and working on the energy transition, but without being so knowledgeable about the mining industry and so on. So I have many questions. I'm wondering is, in general, from your knowledge of the mining sector, to what extent and how precisely should or would the development of the mining industry be a bottleneck for the global energy transition towards renewables? Do you think that mining will expand fast enough? And if not, minings of which minerals would be the main bottlenecks?
Just from my part, my opinion, for some minerals, the industrial mines won't open fast enough to follow the energy transition. And it's even what is the CEOs of many mining companies are complaining that they won't be able to open new mines to follow, especially the copper demand, which is quite exponential, but it's very true for lithium. We will have to open a very, in fact, it's almost acted that the supply of lithium won't be enough in a few years, in the very near future, to supply the entire battery industry.
It is because of technical reasons, or because southern countries do not want to open more mines?
For both, because if you want to open a mine, you have to have exploring projects, and in between the exploratory moment and the opening of the mine, you have 10 or 15 years.
Yeah,
I don't remember well the number, but when you have like 10.
For the international energy transition, it's 15 years on average.
Yeah, you mean that for exploration? Yeah. For 100 exploration projects, there's only one project that will go to the next step to a feasibility study, and one of two of these projects that will end up in a mine. So there's a lot of exploration that doesn't end up on a mining project. It's really a small minority.
It's quite difficult to have a very good picture of that, because for instance, in Latin America, there is a lot of junior companies that invest in concessions and pilot plans, and they aim at selling that to major companies. But meanwhile, we don't know what will work, what won't work. So you have lots of projects.
There is also two things, is that feasibility studies aims at determining if the project is bankable. Yeah. There will be enough benefits for it. If the material becomes scarce, then the price goes up, and then one project that was not bankable at one time becomes bankable. And so just by changing of the global market, you can open more mines because you increase the reserves, because it is more bankable to mine. So everything it's intertwined, I would say.
The thing that is very, very interesting with lithium is that for that mineral, you have project that is coming back to old mining country like France. And for instance, in the Pacific Central, there are for the moment very few projects. So the mentality is also changing.
Maybe Mrs. Yalley, do you want to also do a reaction about discussion? Do you others? So I don't know if you can others. Feel free to react if you want. Do we have another question from the room?
So just I have a question.
Yeah, please.
What kind of difference you can do now from your experience between sustainability and responsibility? Looking at mining.
I would say that I'm thinking at the same time, but I'm going to speak. I would say that responsibility is the responsibility of the mining companies, and that to go to sustainability, it should be more the stakeholders to have a global vision of the territorial development they want. I don't know if it's clear what I said. I don't know. I should think a lot about it.
It's a trajectory toward sustainability.
Yeah. Responsibility, I would say, is part of achieving sustainability, obviously. But it is not sufficient.
What is the point to attend for you? And it's
I'm not sure that there is a point. I would say that it is a trajectory that is important.
The main difference is also when you speak of responsible mining, you put the mining actor in charge. When you speak of sustainability, you put the mining actor, but also all the other stakeholders, putting back in place political actors, putting back in place community, society, science.
Because this definition are very different from public operators, private operators, scientific work.
It's also, I mean, Marie, she's a geographer. I am a geologist, and I'm starting to work also on the environmental impacts. And even when we are discussing, we need to discuss some vocabulary. What do you mean by this term?
And so also what when you are speaking about low tech, what is the sense of low tech for you?
Low tech
to apply or to improve or to increase?
Is not necessarily going back to what we used to have, but to have a technology that may be less performant in terms of speed or in connection, but that we could recycle easier, that we could repair, that it's.
Are you sure that is a real term? Because high-tech could be a good tool also to solve your problems. So, okay, I address that.
No, because when we speak of high-tech, we generally speak of connected technology, and all that needs more minerals and more energy.
Actually, we will miss time.
Okay, thank you.
We have another question here.
Yeah, sorry, forgive me, I forgot to introduce myself before. I'm Francesco Contino from Belgium, Monsieur Louvain. I was wondering about more, you mentioned it just before, mining in France and mining in Europe in general. I was wondering if that was lack of education of new technologies for mining, or what was the reason for difficulties to mine in Europe? What were the reasons and what were the perspective in that direction? Because what we have seen so far is that if it is in a under robust governance, it has more chances to be good. And what I also noticed in your presentation is that it's often associated with net loss, whereas it could be net gain in some cases.
So I would say in Europe we have really heterogeneous countries. As we said before, Sweden or Ireland, that's mining countries for 100 years. And they are still mining now, and they are really competitive in mining for some minerals. In France or in Germany as well, mining stopped several tens years ago. I think in France, the last gold mine closed 20 years ago, and we still hear about it because of all the arsenic contamination. But most mines in many European countries closed during the 20th century. So we have no more the mining culture. And so people nowadays, if you ask them, would you accept a mine to open like 20 kilometers from where you live? They would say no. That's what we call the NIMBY syndrome, not in my backyard. I want minerals, but don't go and extract them near me. And this is something really common in France or in some other former mining countries in Europe.
Also, if I can just add that we come from the Alps, and there's other activities which have developed, like environmental activities, tourism on mountains. And we've got a lot of lithium in the reserve next to the Mont Blanc. But I don't think people would like to change the skiing activity or mining activity. So also we are more densely populated in Europe and in Latin America. That also complicates the mining activity to open. So there's lots of, and last one that I can think of, when you go in France, all the mining territories, I'm thinking of the northern region, then not quite the most developed region that we have in France. So there's also this imaginary connected to the coal mining.
Yeah, precisely. There is a narrative related to the black men going back from the mine. Thanks.
Sorry, maybe we can take the last question from Marie to Hugo.
I was wondering, with your prompt, where you were looking for the knife flags in the territory next to mining in the whole country, because and where I work, generally the benefits are seen in the towns near the mining site, or in the metropolitan area very far from the mining site. The next question is, why you live in this area?
So Hugo, you have to be short because we must end at scope.
So I look in the perimeter of the mine from 5 kilometers to about the interesting area is about up to 40 kilometers away from the mine. And for lithium, my guess is that there is competition over water resources that force people to go elsewhere.
That's it.
I mean,
Thank you all. So thank you all, speaker, for your presentation. And you must close the session now because keynote speech will start at 3 o'clock. So I invite you to go to the main room, please. Thank you.
it is for